Good evening, everyone. My name is Jody Perry. I'm the president and CEO of the Greece Chamber. It's my pleasure to welcome you tonight. Along with me, I have Allison Grems, president and CEO of the Canandaigua Chamber, and Dick Swanson, president of the Henrietta Chamber. We're really pleased to have participation tonight from 19 local chambers of commerce. This group of chambers has been meeting for the last 5 years, and we've done a variety of events together, from legislative event like this. Last fall, we did an educational event, and every spring we do our very popular Mega Mixer. I want to announce the names of all of our partner chamber organizations. If you're here as a leader of the organization, please go ahead and stand. We had participation from the Brighton Chamber of Commerce, the Greater Brockport Area Chamber of Commerce, the Canandaigua Chamber of Commerce, the Greater Churchville-Riga Area Chamber of Commerce, the East Rochester Chamber of Commerce, Fairport Parenton Chamber of Commerce, the Gates-Chili Chamber of Commerce, the Greece Chamber of Commerce, the Henrietta Chamber of Commerce, Hilton Parma Hamlin Chamber of Commerce, Honeoye Falls Mendon Chamber of Commerce, Rondequoit Chamber of Commerce, Penfield Business Association, the Penfield Chamber of Commerce, the Pittsford Chamber of Commerce, the Rochester Business Alliance, the Spencerport Chamber of Commerce, the Victor Chamber of Commerce, and the Webster Chamber of Commerce. So we are very pleased to have all of them tonight helping us promote this, and I will hand things over to Allison.
Thanks, Jody. Good evening, everyone. We just want to make sure that we talk a little bit about what this group does. So we do come together all year round to provide quality programming and networking opportunities for the greater Rochester area. When you came in tonight, you were given a card with contact info for each of the chambers, as well as an upcoming event if there is one scheduled. If you are not a member of your local chamber, we do encourage you to contact them and get involved. It's a great way to show your support for the local business community and help the things that we're going to be talking about tonight. We are pleased to have WXXI covering tonight's event. This event will be available for viewing on the web at wxxinews.org and on air this Friday at 8:30 p.m. on Need to Know, broadcast channel 21, cable 11. And Dick, I'll let you finish things out.
We'd also like to thank the staff of the Dryden Theater for their assistance with the preparations for this evening, and also the staff of the RBA for heading up the registration and public relations for our event. It's our pleasure at this point to hand things over to Chris Wiest, Vice President for Public Policy at the RBA and tonight's moderator. He'll introduce the rest of our distinguished panel, and I'd like to thank again everybody for coming.
Well, good evening. My name is Chris Wiest. First of all, I'd like to thank the chambers for inviting me to be the moderator tonight, and again, to thank our panelists for being here. We're looking forward to a very interesting conversation over the next hour and a half or so. That's where we're going to focus our conversation tonight. What are the issues really that in particular the employer community should be aware of and should know as we enter this election season and as we want to try to make some informed decisions? The format for tonight's program is going to be pretty straightforward. We're going to have a question and answer session here with our panelists. And these are going to be mostly questions that have been developed over the last month or so of issues that we hear from all of our respective members of the chambers, things that are on their minds. We're going to ask the panel to elaborate a little bit more on that. And then we're going to open it up to the audience. We're going to ask for your input. So if you didn't pick up an index card on your way in, wave your hand and we'll make sure you get one during the course of the conversation. If there's a question you'd like us to ask, feel free to fill out the card, and we'll try to include that in the Q&A with the panel. And then finally, we're going to wrap things up for a couple minutes, giving everyone a little bit of time just to summarize their thoughts on things we need to know going into the elections. All right, so without further ado, I'm going to introduce our group here. To my right and your left, we have Mike Durant, who's the New York State Director for the National Federation of Independent Businesses. To Mike's right is Brian Sampson, who is the Executive Director for Unshackle Upstate. And next to Brian is Jeff Williams, who's the Deputy Director for the New York Farm Bureau. Again, gentlemen, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you.
Let's offer them a round of applause right now. I'm doing that now because I'm not sure how it's going to end up at the end here, so we'll get the applause right off the bat. All right, so no softballs here, right out of the gate, guys. What do you believe is the most important issue voters should consider in determining who to support in their state legislature races? So, Brian, you have kind of home field advantage here. I think I'm going to ask you to start off, and then we'll ask Jeff and Mike to weigh in.
Sure. I think, as we have gone through the last 18 months looking at 2 legislative cycles, what has been done, what hasn't been done, a lot of good things have happened. But I think as I look into what's going to happen next year, 2013, 2014, it's really going to be about the business regulatory environment, specific issues that impede our ability to create private sector jobs, how the government continues to be a barrier in how our businesses try to advance their own plans, again, to help all of you in your local communities grow jobs. I think the other part is, when I look at it as 1 and 1A, is mandate relief. We clearly supported the property tax cap. We think it was one of the best things that the state has done in probably a couple of decades. But we supported it to have a good conversation about mandate relief. Our local government units, both municipal and education, are going to get squeezed quite aggressively if we don't have more movement on mandate relief. So the tax cap will work. The tax cap will work much better if we have significant mandate relief to help our local governments control where they spend their money so that you as a taxpayer get the services you want from your municipal government, and we get the education that our kids deserve. So I think those are probably the 2 biggest things we're going to look for.
Mike, what would you add to that?
You covered mandate relief and reg reform.
Yeah, good.
Thanks. So I look at it as this fall, the economy and the ability to create jobs needs to be front and center and to be the chief issue. I view 2013, I think, as the ball game in New York. It'll be the year before the governor starts his re-election campaign. It'll be a non-election year for the state legislature as it gets elected in its body in the next 5 weeks. And the focus does need to be on mandate relief. It needs to be on reg reform. And I think getting in the weeds a little bit for reg reform, we need to look at health care. There's a lot of uncertainty as New York goes and implements the Affordable Care Act and puts a health exchange in place. You have UI, workers' comp, energy costs. There's a lot of things that are related to those, and I'm sure that we'll cover. But we need to start to, I think, and all 3 of our organizations do this, and I say this a lot, try to educate lawmakers to not look at these issues in a vacuum and understand that each and every one is related. You can't, and I'll save it for later. But I look at 2013 as a ball game. The governor and Albany likes to say that New York is open for business, and we have a fancy ad campaign, and it's nice. But if our municipalities and our school districts start to go bankrupt, we're never going to be open for business, and we're going to continue to hemorrhage population. So for me, I view 2013 as the ball game.
Okay. Thanks for taking my open for business question, Mike. Jeff, what would you add to that?
I don't know what more can be said on that topic other than the fact that it's not one specific issue, I don't believe. It's more of a philosophy. And as Mike talked about open for business, and it sounds fantastic, but we need to really make the tough decisions in order to make New York open for business. So if we're thinking about a thruway toll increase to offset the structural deficits of the Thruway Authority, is that really going to open New York for business? There's so many other issues like that, energy, minimum wage, things like that, that really you need to make the tough decisions and not kick the can down the road. So it's more of a philosophy than any particular specific piece of legislation or issue.
All right, let's take a little bit of a deeper dive into one of these areas that a couple of you guys brought up, and that's mandate relief. So there's been a lot of conversation amongst municipalities, employers, taxpayers in general on how we have to have mandate relief. And it's such a broad topic. Help us understand a little bit more specifically what sort of mandate relief we're talking about, and particularly for the employer community, what are the things that we really need to see happen in that area? Mike, why don't you start that off?
Well, mandate relief has probably been the most overused word in Albany in the last 2 years. And I don't think that you've been able to listen to the radio, watch TV, or open a newspaper and not see mandate relief. I'd look at this as, and taking even a step back, as Brian and I and Jeff and our other partners lobbied very hard, advocated very hard to get the tax cap put in place. I think it was lobbied. Well, I think it's like a dirty word sometimes. Advocated strongly to get the tax cap in place. You heard the opponents to that say, no, we need to do mandate relief first. The tax cap would be a blunt instrument. It would be onerous. But we always believed that to solve the state and local tax burden, and for small business, specifically the property tax burden, it needed to be a multifaceted approach. You need to have the cap and you need mandate relief. For mandate relief, what do we mean? We're talking about the percentage of healthcare contribution that our teachers and our public employees pay in. There are school districts, believe it or not, that have some of their employees pay a percentage of healthcare or of their health insurance, 15, 18% for family plan. That's fine. But then you have other school districts where their employees contribute 0. You can take Triborough. Triborough Amendment basically states that if you have a contract and it expired, that there's no need, there's no urgency to go back and negotiate a new one because the provisions of the old contract remain in place. So when the economy has been stagnant or in recession as it has the last 4 years, and you have municipalities or public employees that have their contracts expired, they're not going to negotiate better contracts that are more fiscally sound or will ensure some more stability. So these are very, very heated, difficult discussions, but we need, again, kind of going back at the beginning, lawmakers to be educated and to understand that this isn't time for soundbite. The situation and the fiscal cliff is there. I think we saw recently the city of Syracuse said that if they raised their property tax rate 1%, I think it would be like $250,000 to $300 and some thousand would be raised. Well, that's fine because their pension obligation is increasing at a rate that wouldn't even make a dent in it. The property tax is not a mechanism like it used to be anymore that's going to be able to feed the beast. So structural changes need to be made.
Yeah, I think I'd add on to that. When you as a business owner, you as a homeowner look at your own personal finances, if you had one area that was taking up 65 to 75% of your income and you knew you had to cut spending somewhere, you'd go to the area where you're spending the most money, right? I mean, that's sort of what makes sense. Unfortunately, when it comes to local governments, municipalities, and school districts, 65 to 75% of their spending is on labor costs. It's salary, it's benefits, it's pension. So it becomes very uncomfortable for them to start talking about how are we going to control those costs because that's somebody's livelihood. But the reality is, some of the things that Mike talked about are those cost drivers. It's why we got together with the three of us, our organizations, worked with the Conference of Mayors, the New York State Council of School Superintendents, and the New York State School Boards Association to create something called Let New York Work. Let New York Work is a 6-point plan that we believe is a fair approach, a modest approach to mandate relief that will help our schools and our municipal governments live under that 2% cap, keep the integrity of the cap in place, yet still provide those services. So it includes, obviously, a pension reform piece that got done this past year. It's about binding arbitration relative to our police and our fire. It's about controlling construction costs. So how do we recalculate the use of prevailing wage on public works projects if we even have to do prevailing wage? I mean, there's a whole nother discussion about whether or not New York is calculating prevailing wage or has the right to calculate prevailing wage the way it is. You know, how do we do project labor agreements in a way that's beneficial for everybody? Not doing away with things. I think we all have to come to grips that New York is not Wisconsin. We are not going to simply implode the system and start over. It won't happen here. So we have to come to a little bit of reality that there have to be more modest approaches to making these changes. That's what Let New York Work is all about. So you as business owners, the property tax cap was the largest tax in New York State. So we had to get some cost controls there. You as homeowners, upstate New York's home to 9 of the 10 highest tax counties as a percentage of home value. We can't keep on that path, and when 65 to 75% of the local cost is driven by these laws, we have to fix the laws. But it's going to make people uncomfortable. It's going to make elected officials uncomfortable. It may make you uncomfortable talking about public employees. Our issue is not with the rank and file members of the unions. All right? People deserve a fair wage. They deserve good benefits. That's what they're there. They're providing us a service. So they should get paid. The function in the, I guess, it's not anger, but our concern is with the union leadership that won't let the local units bargain new pay rates, bargain new health care contributions because of these laws. So those are the things that we really have to take care of.
The other 800-pound gorilla in the room is Medicaid costs. When New York State has to pay half of what they get from the federal government, and the counties take over 25% of that, that eats up a lot of money at the county level and forces them to deal with not only Medicaid, but then all the other issues that we've been talking about. And so, especially with farms, and since farms are such large landowners, we bear a lot of the tax burden in counties. And that Medicaid, especially the Medicaid package that we have, which is very rich compared to other states in the country, and then the fact that counties have to share in the payment of those Medicaid services without any decision-making capacity at all at the local level to say, yes, no, we want to offer this, we want to offer this, but not this, or we don't want to pay 25% and not make a decision on how we pay it, or what we get, is really just insane. And so you add that to the mix, and mandate relief takes on a whole other level of seriousness.
Okay, we're going to delve into mandate relief a little bit more as we go throughout the conversation here, I'm sure. But I want to piggyback on property tax cap. So all your organizations advocated for the property tax cap. My question to you, a year later, we've been through a budget cycle. How well is it working?
Fantastic. I
Didn't expect any other answer.
Right. Well, I mean, it's doing what we needed it to do, and that's controlling costs, and it's creating a level of angst and making people uncomfortable, understanding that when revenues are capped at 2%, yet your expenses are escalating at 3, 4, 5%, it's going to force that very tough conversation that for years we could never have because we didn't have the tax cap in place. So I think it's working great. Another year down the road, if the governor and the legislature take another punt on mandate relief, I'll still tell you it's a fantastic tool, but I'm just going to turn the finger around and point it at them that they didn't do anything. This is about them finally having the courage to deal with what's out there. And that is that the costs are there, the laws impede our ability to control that cost, we have to fix the laws.
The answers are there, they just need the willingness to make those decisions. And Mike was absolutely right, 2013 really is the critical year because next year when the governor's running for re-election, it's going to be tough for him to make those very tough decisions. So next year, in a legislative election year, should be the year, hopefully will be the year.
Do you think it's fantastic, Mike?
Yeah, I do. I mean, it like Brian said, is doing its job. I think the disappointment or the surprise is all relative when it comes to Albany, though. So the surprise is that it did not drive a more significant conversation on mandate relief quicker. And what I mean is, okay, they did Tier 6 and strongly advocated and spent an awful lot of time on Tier 6 from January to March. And that's great. But they also had a mandate relief task force that was traveling around the state holding public hearings, and I had an opportunity to testify. I know Brian did. I know a lot of business chambers of commerce, and I know a lot of business people, interested parties in schools. But if I remember back correctly to January, there was going to be this thing that was going to happen at the end of session, that this report was going to come out, and all these mandates were going to be brought before the legislature, and we were going to have an up or down vote, which, as for an advocate, that's a dream come true, because we're going to make them all sit there and have to take a floor vote on these significant cost drivers that really need to be changed. But I still haven't seen the report, and I know the legislature didn't take an up or down vote. So my finger is pointed at both the governor and the legislature for that one. And in reality, it marks a time, and I say this a lot, Albany was functioning at a pretty good level. And we can debate, and I'm sure we will, whether it's been substantial or incremental, but it was from the time that Governor Cuomo introduced his first budget till he signed the second one. And that's when Tier 6 had gotten done. So from April to now, today as we sit, there's not a lot of good conversations happening, if any are at all. and that's the problem.
And I'll use my own school district as an example. We're having horrible fiscal financial problems in the school district because of the tax cap. And so they wanted to stay below the cap, but they had to cut all of these, like school sports, for example, or languages, or special education services, which my son needs. But they aren't able to get at the actual 85% of the budget, which is salaries in the union negotiations. And so they're left tinkering around the edges of the other 15% to try to make these wholesale changes, which are frankly impossible to make without getting at the other 85%. And so that Let New York Work program is exactly designed to let us get at that 85% of the school budget. Because when we vote in the budget, we're voting on 15% of the budget every year.
And not that we want to get on education issues, and I don't want to talk about education issues, so please don't ask me to talk about education issues. But the mother of all mandates that came out is the APPR, the teacher evaluation. I think everyone will agree that there's always been some concern about whether teachers are fairly evaluated and so on and so forth. We put all that aside. That APPR is going to cost school districts somewhere between $500,000 and $1 million over the course of the next 3 years to implement, depending on the school size. No funding for it. That's the sort of stuff that has to stop if we're going to, be successful like we want to be.
So Brian, on education. When the property tax cap first came out, there was a lot of opposition from school groups, labor groups, about the devastating impact it would have. And yet this past year, there was an alliance that formed, and Unshackle and the other groups on the stage here as well worked together to lobby for some of these mandate relief items that we've been talking about. Can you elaborate a little bit more on what we have in common on those sorts of things?
So what Chris is talking about was how we got Let New York Work formed, and Mike and I went to Utica to meet with the school boards, the school superintendents, and the Conference of Mayors. We met halfway between Albany and here because I didn't really want to drive all the way to Albany, so they're gracious enough to meet me in Utica. But we sat down, and their first question was, why should we be sitting here at this table with you when you supported the cap and we opposed it? And I said, well, I'll be very honest with you. I want to protect the integrity of the cap. So if I'm going to protect that cap, I need to work with you. And oh, by the way, you need to work with me, because without our help pushing your issues, you look like you are just continuing to be on your own bandwagon. What we brought to them was the farming community, the business community, the taxpayers, Main Street small business. We came and said, we're now unified on this agenda. It created an unnatural alliance, or as we sometimes refer to it, the unholy alliance, of when we walked into the legislator's office, they're like, wow, hold on a second here. We can't pit one side against the other anymore like we typically do in Albany. These guys are all talking about the issues. And it's all designed, again, to make our communities affordable. And that's Let New York Work. It's a common agenda for the common good. How do we make our communities affordable?
So let's talk a little bit more about some of the synergy, some of the momentum that's developing. 3-4 years ago, having the three of you on this stage talking in unison probably wasn't going to happen. What are things for us to be encouraged by in terms of how business groups are working more closely together to be effective in getting some of these changes we're talking about? So I want to talk a little bit about that.
Well, three smart guys, no, sorry.
Jeff, let's have you lead this.
4 years ago, I think we were still looking at a democratically controlled Senate. And that made all of our lives very tough, because up to that point, we had relied upon the Republicans in the Senate majority to stop many of the anti-business bills that came out of the Assembly. And I think it was over those 2 years we really galvanized our relationship as a coalition to work to try to stop these bills, because they were coming at us from the environmental front, from the employer front, from the transportation front. And we spent a lot of hours working on those issues. For example, there is a labor mandate on farms, in which these gentlemen probably wouldn't care too much about. I know Mike has some members who are farmers, but it would have essentially shut the door on farms in the state by forcing employers to pay farm workers at a much higher rate than other workers. But these organizations and a number of others stood with us to try to beat that bill back, and luckily we did. But it's those kind of efforts that have helped us now move forward in working proactively. At that time, we were all defense, and now we've established relationships, and now are able to work proactively on something like the Let New York Work program and other issues.
And with that, I think that there has become an understanding that, as like Jeff just said, I have farms that are also members, and I represent 10,000 plus small businesses across the state. Obviously, I'm going to have a cross-section, and I do, of a lot of different types of business. And same thing with Brian and some of the other broader business groups. So we have to understand that a lot of these smaller groups, or these industry-specific groups, we need to work with us, and we need to work with them, because he knows about the Farm Labor Bill inside and out, and I might know it sideways just a little bit, but he can provide the technical stuff, and we can both utilize our membership and push an issue. I think that for some business groups, working collaboratively and collectively has taken a lot of ego out of the equation. At the end of the day, we all represent the employers of the state of New York, and we are humbled and we are honored to have that ability. So it doesn't matter who gets the credit for who gets it done. The objective is to get these things done. And I think that, you know, Brian and I, as broader business groups, have been able to have that. We both understand that we represent similar things, sometimes a little bit of a different, and it doesn't matter if he gets a credit or I do, because both of us are going to take it anyway at the end of the day. But as long as we get it done and we can pool our resources, whatever it is, to get it done, it's benefiting all of you. And at the end of the day, that's what we're trying to do. Take our own egos out of it, take our own organizational needs out of it. Let's just get it done. And I think that that's been the mindset that has changed, particularly in the last 2 years.
I wholeheartedly agree. It's less about who gets the credit and more about getting positive things done. And I think we've all realized over the course of the last few years that we're not always going to agree on the issues. There may be something that Mike supports that we don't, but I won't work with Mike on that issue. But on these other things, we will. And I think that's really where the business community has learned from our mistakes. You know, we spent a number of years, all of us in our own individual silos. One would go into a meeting with an elected official and hear one thing. I would come in and hear something else, and Jeff would go in and hear yet a third thing. And I think there's a lot of people behind the closed doors laughing, going, okay, well, we dodged that issue. Well, now we don't do that. We walk in collectively together and say, here's the issue, here's the legislation we support, or how can you help us on this issue? It's less divisive, and that's very good. And I think we learned as well. 2009 and 2010 were arguably, from a business community, a taxpayer perspective, a couple of the worst years in the history of New York State. When you think about, we got the millionaires tax passed, and keep in mind, millionaires in New York State started at $250,000. So if that's any of you in the room, congratulations, you had received a bump there in the last, a new title. So we had that. We saw an additional $15 billion in spending, an additional $14 billion in taxes. Downstate, they saw the MTA payroll tax. We saw a farm labor bill get advanced. I mean, there was just a gluttony of horrible things that came out. And I think all of us realized pretty quickly, if we were going to correct that, it started in 2010 with all of us working together in the elections. You know, supporting similar candidates, talking about similar issues, making sure we are aligned, pointing our efforts in the right direction, even in some instances pointing our money in the right direction. We got a different Senate in 2011 and 2012. We have a new governor as well. The governor deserves a great deal of credit for where New York is today as compared to 2 years ago. The New York State Senate deserves credit for New York being where it is today than it was 2 years ago. Members of the Upstate Assembly Democratic Conference deserve credit for helping us defeat and keep a lot of things away from the assembly floor that would have been bad for us. So I think there's credit for everybody, but the one thing we've learned that if we're going to continue to have success, we have to have open lines of communication. And as Mike said, we're honored to be able to represent all of you and hope that you will continue to work with us and share your thoughts and ideas. We don't know all the issues. We can only talk about those things that you all share with us that are impediments to your business. So through your local chamber, please keep those lines open.
Okay, getting it done. At the end of the day, that's all that counts, right?
Yes.
And a couple of you were talking about that. So you said, Mike, that educating legislators is part of what we need to be doing, but accountability is also a piece of this. And each of your organizations came out with a report card this year. I'd like each of you to talk a little bit about your report cards and really what were some of the key areas of focus and what you hope to accomplish with those. And Mike, why don't you start?
Well, NFIB has a process, and we endorse and we get involved in elections, and we do all that. And a key component for that is, for the incumbent, is a voter record. In the last 2 years, NFIB issued paper, a position paper, opposed support on 119 pieces of legislation. So the last 2 years, we worked on 119 bills. At the end of the day, I was able to select 7. Which there's a joke in there too. I mean, I was able to select 7 in both the Senate and the Assembly. Now, the bill had to pass at least one side or the other. These bills are not necessarily passed both. For the grade, we had Article 10, which is the power plant siting bill. We had the property tax cap. We had Tier 6, but then we had minimum wage, which was voted upon in the Assembly. We had a repeal of the wage, or reform of the Wage Theft Prevention Act, which was voted on in the Senate. You had Voice over Internet Protocol, a bill that would help enhance and really expand broadband internet access infrastructure, because believe it or not, there are parts of the state that do not have, which you guys have right here. So there were a lot of workers' comp and some health care stuff, and they get graded. Simply put, you voted, there it is. You knew what the NFIB position was. You had, you did what you did. In the Senate, we had 11 senators score 100, a perfect score, which is indicative, I think, of the fact that there has been a mindset change a little bit. The highest score that anybody received in the Assembly was an 86. There was a bunch of Assembly Republicans that did score an 86, and one Assembly Democrat, Robin Schimminger in Buffalo, scored an 86. I had 5 Democrats out of 212 legislators pass. That means that there's a lot more work to do. Now, I was asked this question recently, and I said, if I took the math and I looked at the average percent of a lawmaker, the percentage is higher than it was 2 years ago. So if the average lawmaker had a 30% voting record for small business, at least from NFIB standard, we're maybe at a 50, because there were a lot of lawmakers that had a 50. So the work's still done to educate them, or to at least make the focus. And when I become bombastic or angry, as he says, what gets me angry, and this leads into the election, and it leads into a lot of things that are happening. It kind of goes with the whole mandate relief. It's been a buzzword, it's overused. Well, same with small business. And I take it really seriously. If you're going to say that you're for small business, we need to help small business, we need to drive small business, we understand that the bulk of the hiring in this country, in this state, is from small business, then vote like it. Don't just talk about it. And especially don't talk about it in your district and then go to Albany and forget what you said when you were back home and vote the way Sheldon Silver or somebody like that. If he gets mad at me, it's okay. If Sheldon Silver, figure, don't do what he tells you to do. And then go back and say, I'm trying to help small business. There's a lawmaker right now that voted for the MTA payroll tax. I know it's not a big thing here, but for my members downstate it is. It's a huge tax on small business in the metropolitan New York City area and Long Island. Well, then when they voted to semi-repeal it, now he hasn't announced that it was in part of the tax code overhaul. That is a little squishy thing, but it wasn't really a tax code overhaul. He voted to repeal part of it. So now he's got a mailer out there and he's running saying, I am a tax reformer. No, you're not. You voted for it 2 years ago, and now you voted against it. And the only reason you did is because it was in a package that was going to be, in a sense, the millionaire's tax redux. So no, you're not. So that's the whole point. And that's where all of you, and I think that all three of us are going to kind of keep hitting this theme, are important and a vital cog in what we're trying to do, because you're here. And as business owners, lawmakers visit you. As leaders in chambers and commerce, lawmakers like to visit you because they like the support, because they like the pat on the back. You need to understand and make them feel uncomfortable when they're here, and make sure when they go to Albany, they're still doing what they told you here. We're doing that, but the more pressure and the more that you do here is helpful.
Thank you. I don't
Now
think you got
Phelps.
bombastic at all. I thought it was very reasonable.
I don't think he was bombastic, but he talked for so long, I don't remember what the question was. No.
Report card.
Scorecard, yes. All right, I'm there.
You're going to talk for 10 minutes.
No, I'm not. Watch. So we have, like Mike, we have an Unshackle Upstate scorecard. It's based on a 2-year period. It's a pro-business, pro-taxpayer scorecard. Here comes the commercial. You can find it at unshackleupstate.com/legislative activity/scorecard. But go ahead and take a look at it. It's our ability to share with you some of the things that we see over the course of the past 2 years that we thought were either good for taxpayers or bad for taxpayers, good for the business community, bad for the business community. The budget and legislation that we want to see advanced. So when an elected official sponsors a bill that we support, they get credit for it. When they sponsor a bill we don't support, they lose credit for it. So it's our way just to share with you, here's a little bit of a snapshot into what's happened over the course of the last 2 years. Take it, use it as a tool. If you like what you see with your elected official, then by all means vote them back into office. But if you didn't like what you saw, and again, you don't have to agree with us, by the way, everyone's entitled to their own opinions. But if you didn't like what you saw and there's a credible candidate, well, vote them in. I mean, and we have to take a responsibility. Mike said we're going to hammer this point home, so we're going to hammer it home. We have to be responsible for our own individual votes. And for a number of years, everywhere you went, I'm sure you talked to your friends and they said, ugh, it's just New York. Ugh, my vote doesn't matter. I'm here to tell you it does matter. If you think back to just a couple of short weeks ago in the primaries, right? There are 4 state Senate races, 4, that were decided by less than 550 votes, cumulatively. Not individually, cumulatively. 550 votes. It matters. So please, go get educated. Don't necessarily believe all the commercials you see on TV. All right? They're emotional tear jerkers to really get you galvanized. Do the research. Look at his scorecard, look at my scorecard, look at the Farm Bureaus. The RBA will have their endorsements. Find out what's going on, and then go and cast the vote as you see it's appropriate for what you want for your community.
Jeff, why should voters care about what's on the Farm Bureau's scorecard?
It's funny. We spend a lot of time, obviously, trying to educate lawmakers about farm policy and the decisions that they make in their offices or on the Senate or Assembly floor actually impact farm businesses. And we try to tell farmers the same thing. That's why you need to get politically active, because you can sit at your kitchen table, get out the ledger, and make all the decisions to try to eke as much profit, if any, out of your farm. And you think you're there until one person makes one vote in Albany and takes it all away. And we hammer that home quite a bit. Our challenge is most of the people voting on farm policy have never stepped one foot on a farm in their lives. Yet they have as people do, very intense feelings personally about food and the food they eat and where they get it from. And then they make decisions that sometimes are ill-informed about the farms that produce that food. And that's what we try to combat at the Capitol all the time. Most of our consumers are in urban metropolitan New York City. That's our holy grail of marketing. We send a lot of food down there, but we could send a whole lot more down there to help upstate farms.
Wait. I got a question for
Yes.
you. Okay. No. This is good. This is good. So that farm labor bill you talked about, that was sponsored by who?
A Democratic senator and a Democratic assemblyperson from downstate.
From where?
From New York City.
And what happened to that Democratic senator? Oh, I'm sorry. Never mind.
Good question, thank you. And if you look at great example of the assembly districts. There's 150 assembly districts in the state. There's not one farm, commercial farm, until you get well over the 100th assembly district, with the first one being the east end of Long Island, working your way up through New York City, up into the lower Hudson Valley, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You're into the hundreds before you hit a farm. So our work is cut out for us because that's our market, yet they're making the decisions that impact our wallets. And so this is where these scorecards come in, because we can only educate them as much as we can by going just retail lobbying, office, office, office. But they have a very strong feelings about farms. They want them to survive. They're just making the wrong decisions about how to make them survive. And so they pay attention to our scorecard. We don't endorse. We rank somewhere around 30 to 40 bills in each house that pass. And I would say 90% of them are all pretty much feel-good bills that no one would really oppose. But it's that last 10% of bills, the farm worker bill, the minimum wage legislation, environmental regulations or restrictions that make it or break it for a farm. And those are the ones that we look at, and mostly people mess up on in order not to get on our list. And so I think this year, out of 212 legislators, over 100 made our legislative award list, because in some cases votes were easier this year. But in the assembly, with the minimum wage vote going through, a number didn't get it. And there was also some environmental legislation as well that was very restrictive. And I am continually, I've been here for over 10 years, continually surprised by the number of legislators who call and say, why am I not on your list? I love when the farmers come and give me my award, and I look forward to it. I take pictures from press releases, and how come that's not happening this year? And that is an eminently teachable moment. I did it this morning with a legislator, an assemblyman. And they said, well, what bills did I miss? And we roll through the 4 or 5 that they missed on, and we talk about why we either opposed or supported them and why they voted the way they did. And we had a really true conversation about policy, which happens very rarely in Albany. I hate to say it. And it's a great teachable moment, and they work the next year to get back on the list. And so it's a very powerful tool. Even though we don't endorse, they take that legislative award and promote it because they're proud of it. And it's a very good tool.